Welcome guys to my channel, and I'm going to present you what Football Manager 2020 predicted for the 2020 Canadian Premier League season. So just to preface this video, I want to say that the person who created this whole mega patch is the Canadian Megapatch is Edward Hunsing Wong. I'll leave his link to his Twitter down in the description down below, and I'll leave the link to the mega patch down below too. Anyway, so as some of you guys may have known, the Canadian Premier League was added officially to Football Manager just before Christmas of 2019, so last year. And then Edward Hunsing Wong, he ended up, I think, editing that whole edition of the Canadian Premier League to add Atletico Ottawa, who is the expansion team to the Canadian Premier League in the 2020 season, because they only had the first 7 teams, so he added the 8 team, and he added a bunch of amateur leagues like he did last year when I made a video on predicting the 2019 Canadian Premier League season, so you can check that out after this video. Anyway, so let's get right into it. So for the first thing that I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at the who won the championship. And as you can tell, FC Edmonton ended up beating York 9 on penalties. Now, they beat them by 8-7, so it was a pretty slim victory. And some of you may know, and let's look at the league table. FC Edmonton won the league table as well. There's no trophy with that. It's just whoever wins the playoffs is the champion. It's pretty similar to MLS if you don't follow the Canadian Premier League. Last year, there was a spring season and a fall season, similar to Mexico, as many of you Canadian Premier League fans might know. I'm just trying to preface this so that anyone who might not be the biggest fan of the Canadian Premier League understands this. So last year, there was a spring and there was a fall season, and then the winners of those 2 seasons would play off against each other, and then whoever would win it would be the champion of the Canadian Premier League. Now, Cavalry FC, the Calgary team, won both of those seasons. So what happened was that they just picked the top overall record from the second place team, and they played against Cavalry FC, and Forge FC was that second place team, and they ended up winning. So it feels bad for Cavalry FC. This season, Cavalry FC placed second behind their Alberta rival FC Edmonton. York 9 finished third. Something interesting about York 9 though is that I've noticed I did a 1-season simulation before this too, and York 9 ended up winning the championship. So York 9 seems to be pretty good in these 1-season simulations of the 2020 season. Yeah, so the format changed, so there's no spring or fall season this year. There's just one full table, and the top team in the league makes it all the way to the finals already, and these 2 teams, Cavalry FC and York 9, the second and third teams, play against each other in a playoff similar to, you could even say, the championship in the UK, where these 2 teams play against each other, and whoever wins will play the top team in the league in FC Edmonton. So I'm sorry that I went through that whole explanation of the format, but just so that anyone wants to understand that. As you can see, the Atletico Ottawa logo's kind of off. The logo wasn't added in the logo pack, so I ended up adding it. It's pretty makeshift, but I wanted to add their logo in so it's not just a default logo. Anyway, so this is the league table. Something also of note is with York 9, when they beat Cavalry FC in that playoff, they absolutely dominated them. 2-0 and 3-1 away from home, so 5-1 on aggregate. Now let's look at player stats. So, individual player stats. So, Adrian Ugariza, I'm not sure if I quite pronounced that right, but here, 1 second, he ended up getting the Golden Boot. Something of note is that he actually signed in real life for them. He's like one of their new signings. So, and he's also moving to Crystal of the Peruvian League. He's actually at the end of his contract. If you wonder why I know all this stuff too, I've went through this save quite a bit. So, Alex Marshall is the top assist man in the league. He's 22 years old, got 10 assists. how old's Ugariza? He's 23, so he's a pretty good prospect. Easton Ongaro had a really good season, and you'll find out how that he was actually the MVP this year, because if you look at Easton Ongaro, he got 14 goals, 9 assists, 7 player of the matches, 7.28 average rating in 26 appearances. That's a really good rating he got 10 goals last season, so he's a really good prospect, and in the future he might be on the Canadian national team. He's trying to push himself onto that roster. I think there's an article recently on the Canadian Premier League website about him trying to push himself onto that Canadian national team roster, but he's not on it yet. Anyway, what's some other player stats? So least conceded, Tyson Farago. Marco Carducci has also got a lot of shutouts, 11 shutouts. He's continued his good season from last year. Amir Didic has continued to perform well as Sergio Camargo. Most key passes for him. Anyway, I want to go to team stats as well. So let's look at team stats. So one of the things that I liked, York 9 has got the most goals in part due to Ugariza. Least conceded, Cavalry FC. They were good at defense last year as well, so they've kind of continued that. I find attendance is very interesting. I don't know about you guys, but it looks pretty similar to what you would expect. I would expect Atletico Ottawa to be near number 1 or 2. HFX Wanderers or Halifax Wanderers has continued to perform well in attendance in Football Manager, just like they do in real life. They got a lot of seasons ticket holders. Forge FC's really increased their average attendance, I think, from last year, because you have to keep in mind, last year in the inaugural game, they had a game where they had all free tickets and 17,000 fans showed up for free. So 7,000 average. They had around this average attendance, I think a bit lower last year, but that's including that 17,000 free ticket game. So that's a pretty good attendance there. York 9, I think, has increased in attendance. Pacific FC, I think, has decreased in attendance, unfortunately. Now, let's look at net transfer spend. I'll get into transfers and specifics in just a second, but Atletico Ottawa has had the highest transfer spend, not very much, and Forge FC sold one major player. You'll find out about that in a second. Here's the highest average attendances. If you want to pause the screen, you can just check that right now. Anyway, let's what's some other good team stats here? Yeah, I think that's about good. Yeah, I think we can go into transfers. So let's look at the Canadian Premier League transfers. So David Edgar was the one major player that Forge FC sold. Let's look at their transfers. So they sold David Edgar, and this, I'm not going to try and pronounce that, but Atletico Ottawa signed this player. Oluwasiun. Okay, I'm not going to try and pronounce. That's a pretty hard name to pronounce. Looks like they signed no players with a transfer fee, only on a free. Jonathan Cordoba was number 2, just $24,000. He was the biggest signing in terms of transfer fee to Atletico Ottawa, then Baldissimo, and then a player who I can't pronounce their name. Cavalry FC sold one of their players, who I think is actually a new signing in real life as well. I think there's not too many notable things with transfers. Now let's look at head coach movements. So Stephen Hart was sacked. The Canadian I believe he's got some roots in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's Canadian as well. He was fired, replaced by Mista, who was fired by Atletico Ottawa. He's the former TFC player. He was fired by Atletico Ottawa and actually ended up replacing Stephen Hart, who is still unemployed. And then Frank Yallop ended up replacing Mista as the Atletico Ottawa manager. And Frank Yallop used to manage Toronto FC, I believe. No, he didn't manage Toronto FC back in the day. Now I feel kind of dumb about that. But he has managed Chicago Fire. I remember when he was managing Chicago Fire. I don't know why I said Toronto FC. I didn't even think that, but then I just said that. I think I'm thinking of Mista, to be honest. And Tommy Wheeldon Jr. was fired. He hasn't been replaced. That's a stark difference from what happened last year when he was manager of the year. So now, let's look at Atletico Ottawa. I know I've looked at it a bit already. So let's look at them. They finished 6th. I'm sorry if my fan on my computer is a bit loud, but I guess that's just how it is. Oh, they're signing Jacob Schaffelberg at the end of his contract. That's a pretty big signing. He'll be on a high contract. So you can pause the video if you want to look at any of these players. Maxime Tissot they signed from former Ottawa Fury. That's one thing that the creator of this Megapatch did, was he made it so that all of their contracts expire at the end of the season, since this team did fold. So you can sign their players. Jonathan Valley, he sounds familiar. Yeah, not too familiar to me. So they've Bertrand Owundi from Forge FC they've signed. So they've signed some players who have played in the CanPL, but mostly players who haven't played in the CanPL. Daniel Haber is a bit more of a notable player. I've seen him sign on the Megapatch in years previous. And yeah, well, not in years previous, like last year, or well, actually I had a save where I played with York 9 FC and he signed for FC Edmonton, I remember. Let's look at the CONCACAF League. Forge FC should be. Oh yeah, I think this was what happened in 2019. This isn't very relevant. CONCACAF. Not sure. Champions League. I'm not sure how to. Here, let's look up Forge FC's schedule. I'm trying to find the CONCACAF League. I'm not sure if they have it in this game. Do they have North American League? That's what they call it. So how good did Forge FC do in the North American League? So they ended up beating San Francisco from Panama, and then they played Santiago de Cuba. So they were getting fairly, well, you know, not the hardest teams in the tournament, and they ended up progressing. Then they ended up losing to Saprissa. I mean, that would be an expected loss. So they made it all the way to the semifinals. I believe they made it to the quarterfinals and lost on aggregate against Olympia last season in real life. So that's pretty good that they did that. Now I want to look at the Canadian Championship, and then we'll look at the Canadian men's national team. The Canadian Championship, for some reason, there was a few glitches with this. There was also a glitch with Canadian Premier League too. I noticed this when I was playing the game before. It shows FC Edmonton winning in 2000. You guys may have noticed that. Oh my gosh. So, as you may have noticed, Toronto FC is the winner in 2019, when in reality, Montreal Impact ended up winning. That's because it seems like they replayed the whole tournament in this game, because you'll see in 2019 in the final they played against Montreal Impact, but Toronto FC ended up winning instead of Montreal Impact. Something of note here though is, notice who got into the final. York 9 FC played against Forge FC in a 905 derby, and they ended up winning, and Toronto FC beat Montreal Impact to go into the final. So it's York 9 FC versus Toronto FC. I believe that's the first time they would have met up ever, besides any friendly matches maybe that they may have played. Something of note also is that they beat Vancouver, so Vancouver's obviously not very good at playing against Canadian Premier League teams, since they lost against Calgary FC in real life last year. So Toronto FC played against York 9 FC. They kind of smashed them, beat them 2-0 in Toronto, 3-1 also in Toronto, but in York Lions Stadium, and they beat them 5-1 on aggregate to take the trophy for, I guess, in this context, the 5th straight year. And then I want to look at the Canadian men's national team, Canada, actually. So it's kind of disappointing. You can look around here at the team, but it looks like there is no players from the Canadian Premier League in this squad. So hopefully they'll be able to get some players over the next coming years. Maybe I'll sim this into the future a bit more. Like this video and leave any suggestions in the comments. Tell me if you want to sim, say, like 20, 50 years into the future. Make sure to check out the creator of this Megapatch and his Megapatch and this Megapatch. Yeah, thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and until next time, see ya.